See, hello everyone. Let's just wait for the stream to pop up. Hello everyone. I hope you can hear me and see the screen. Okay, everything seems to be working. Let's just wait a little bit for people to join. I'm Christina, and I'm the founder of Amazing Marvin, a to-do app for procrastinators. And I'm also a huge procrastinator. Why? I love this topic so much, and I'm really excited about this webinar. And in the background is my husband, Mark, the other founder of Amazing Marvin, and he will be in the chat, so you can chat with him and ask questions. And at the end, hi Dennis. So you can ask him questions, and I will answer them at the end. Or if anything is unclear, you can also just let him know, and maybe he can stop me from going on to the next point. So yeah, procrastination, a very, very interesting topic, very relevant to a lot of people. Like I said, I have struggled with procrastination probably my whole life. I remember being in first grade and having not studied for a test until, the last minute, and then crying in bed, stuff like that. But in my native language, German, we don't actually use the word procrastination a lot. So it was a while until I really understood sort of this concept of what was always happening to me, and why I struggled with getting certain things done and always waited until the last minute in my school. And for the past couple of years, I've really focused a lot on understanding it and helping people with it and doing coaching. And, my work making Amazing Marvin, the software, is really inspired by this procrastination issue. So in this webinar, we're going to go over a lot. But procrastination is such a big topic that in a lot of ways for each topic, we're just kind of scratching the surface almost. But I really want you to get a lot out of this and just sort of have a big overview over procrastination by the end of this, and a lot of ideas of how you actually tackle it, because that's really what we're focusing on, because that's what we all care about, right? How do we actually beat this thing? And so let's get started. Like I said, I'm trying to include a lot of really helpful information in this webinar, but procrastination is a really large topic, and it really, the specifics always depend on the person. Like, there's a lot of different ways you can procrastinate and why you procrastinate. And if it's something that you're struggling with and have been struggling for a while, I really recommend beating procrastination kind of like a project in your life. There's nothing I can tell you that is just like sort of a quick fix where one thing you hear it and then you do it and then the problem's forever disappeared. It's a complex issue, and if you really want to solve it long term, and you can, you need to kind of really focus on it for a while and have it be present in your head and think about it and implement the strategies and be strategic about it. And to help with that, in 2019, I will be launching a boot camp that's completely online and just kind of helps with that process and gives you guidance and accountability. And I'm there to answer questions and help with anything you need help with. And it's basically the same content. I'm going over the specific approach that it takes in this webinar. So technically you could do this also on your own with the information from this webinar. But yeah, you can sign up to reserve a seat at the following URL at the bottom. And we have sort of this system set up right now that if you share it and you get other people to sign up, you can even join it for free. And I will definitely keep the price very low because, I really know that a lot of people struggle with this, and I don't want you to have to spend a lot to get help. So this is actually the overview of the webinar, and it's called How to Fix Procrastination because that's really what we're focusing on. And so these steps that I'm going to go over in the webinar are all focused on helping you beat procrastination. And the first part in beating procrastination is understanding it. I guess there's this saying that knowing the enemy is, knowing the problem is half the solution, right? So first, we're going to go over what procrastination really is, what happens in your brain during procrastination. And it's really, really important to understand that because there's a lot of confusion about it and also misconceptions. The second part is understanding your own procrastination. So you really want to figure out exactly what your patterns are and why you procrastinate, because those specific reasons vary from person to person, even though procrastination overall has one underlying mechanism. And then we're going to go into the specifics of how to fix it, the different approaches. And I created this 4-part framework where you're attacking it from basically different angles. And one of the angles is that you're shifting mindsets. So we'll identify different mindsets that will basically create and foster this procrastination habit and how you can shift them. And the other part in fixing the problem is very, 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 very important part is retraining your brain. And so I'll go over how to set up a training program for yourself and why this is so effective and important. And then we're also going to go over specific smaller tools and strategies that you can sort of pick and choose from depending on your own procrastination patterns that you can just apply in your life anytime to really help you with it. So what is procrastination? The proper definition of it is it's a needless delay of an intended action. This means that you're delaying something needlessly, meaning there's no good reason to do it. And you're delaying something that you do actually want to do. So you're delaying something even though you know that you're probably worse off for delaying it and that there's no benefit in delaying it. Of course, in life, we sometimes delay things purposefully. Like sometimes, we want to have a trip outside, a picnic, but then it rains, so we have to delay. So that's not procrastination. Procrastination is always when there's basically no good reason for us to delay something, but we do it anyway. And in a lot of ways, it would actually be much better if we didn't delay it. So then the question becomes, well, why do we delay it if there's no good reason? And there is a reason, and it's just an inner resistance that we feel to doing the task. It can come up as thoughts like, I don't feel like it, I don't want to, I'm too tired, we don't want to do it. Even though part of us does want to do it. Otherwise, why do it at all, right? And the key point here is that this resistance isn't always felt, because this can happen very, very quickly. That you're thinking about doing something and your brain just feels the resistance and already decides to not do it, and you do something else to not think about it. So not always do we feel this resistance, but it's always there. So where does this resistance come from? And to answer that question, we have to take a deeper look at our brain. And our brain is very complicated. It's not fully understood, but we know that there's different brain parts that deal with different things. You have a way to process visual information, auditory information, memories, all these kinds of things. And our brain has evolved over a really, really long period of time. And there's brain structures that sort of combined we can call the emotional brain or the ancient brain, because it's one of the oldest parts of our brains, also sometimes called the lizard brain. And we share this with a lot of animals, and it's in some ways where our instincts come from, but also just our basic behaviors. And so the emotional brain has a very, very specific function, and it's designed or evolved over time to just keep us from dying, basically. That's its key function, and to help us procreate and, replicate our DNA. And that is the purpose of the emotional brain. It only cares about survival. And it has a couple of different mechanisms to do that, because obviously this brain part evolved over millions of years and very, very long time ago, where our lives were very different than from now. And one key thing it cares about is energy preservation, because for most of our human species lives, and things are very, very scarce, like food was scarce and there was a lot of dangers, and we needed to always sort of have enough energy so that we could run away or fight a threat. And sometimes there just wasn't enough food, and if we extended too much energy, we would die. So it's trying to avoid unnecessary exertion. That's just something that's part of our brain. It also favors short-term reward over long-term reward. It actually cannot really think long-term. It's a bit like a dog. Like a dog has no sense of time. It doesn't think about the future. That is something that came much later in our brain development. So it kind of goes with the idea of one bird in hand is better than two in the bush. Like if there's something gratifying that you can get like this, it will always favor this. It can't think about long-term things. It also is where our stress response comes from. And the stress response is interesting because it gets triggered in light of danger. So something happens, and then a bunch of things in our body happens to kind of prepare us for dealing with the threat. And something a lot of people are familiar with is fight or flight, but actually they're going to change it, or it's already sort of unofficially changed to fight or flight and freeze, because if we have no hope of running away from the danger or feeling that we can actually fight this thing off, the response is just to freeze and kind of play dead, and we just sort of like shut down. And you can probably already kind of tell how this relates to procrastination. And it uses this pain mechanism to change our behavior, and that's a very basic way that our body functions, and that's why we have nerves everywhere, so that, you know, we feel pain, we always try to avoid pain, we always try to go for pleasure, because if we, you know, crush our hand and it gives us pain, we know, oh, I should stop doing this because this is actually hurting my tissue. And pain can also just exist in the brain, and it's very similar to actual physical pain. So sometimes we think about something that's painful, and it triggers the same sort of response in our brain than if we got physically hurt. So that's just a basic mechanism of, we always try to avoid painful stimuli, painful feelings, because usually that means something is not good for us. It also uses fear. Fear is a very, very powerful emotion. And it uses that for unknown situations to just keep us away, because as you know, whatever we fear, we try to avoid instinctively. So look, if you have a phobia, you go to great lengths to avoid whatever you fear. And that's kind of the purpose of fear. It feels so unpleasant, and it goes away when we remove the fear trigger. This is how our emotional brain works. And we all have the emotional brain. So then how does this relate to procrastination? And basically what happens during procrastination is that somehow our emotional brain tells us, no, don't do this task, run away from it, avoid it. But our prefrontal cortex, which is the newer part of our brain, that is where you sort of have your thoughts and high level thinking, actually says, no, I want to do this task, or I have to do this task. So they're at conflict. And yes, this is a big dilemma. Now, if your prefrontal cortex feels like, you know, this is not a good idea to do this task, then there's no problem. You wouldn't call this procrastination. You decided you don't want to do this. There's no point in doing it. The problem is only when your longer term brain thinking says you should do it, but you feel this resistance from your ancient brain. So it's really your brain in conflict. That's what procrastination is all about. It's your ancient brain versus your modern brain. A good example is, you know, if you write a blog post, but you maybe have perfectionism and you don't actually enjoy writing blog posts, and you worry a lot about what people would say, if it's good. So your rational brain says you should write the blog post. It will help me gain traffic. More traffic will help me make money. With the money, I can buy food. This is important. Do this. But your emotional brain cannot understand any of that reasoning. All it remembers is that blog post writing equals painful, doesn't feel good. Fear, it feels fear when it thinks about it. And this happens very, very quickly. And so you're at conflict. And you have the potential now to procrastinate on this task. And the kind of, you know, interesting thing about this is that the emotional brain works very, very fast. Like within a split second, it processes stimuli and it can judge if it's a danger, and it triggers fear or the stress response. But your rational brain takes a few seconds to actually kick in. So sometimes you're procrastinating something when you didn't even have a chance to really think about it, if this is something you want to do or not. That's kind of what habits are all about. So yeah, then the question is, when your brain is at conflict, which brain part wins? Are you gonna just avoid the task like your emotional brain tells you? Or are you gonna go ahead and do the rational thing? And this depends on how strong the negative emotions are. Like, the more we are afraid, of course, the harder it is actually to overcome it, right? And how strongly you feel emotions based on a task is very individual as well, and that's something we're going to talk about more later. And the question also is, how well can you tolerate negative emotions? So some people just have a higher tolerance for negative emotions, and they can feel fear and be okay with it, and they don't have to immediately run away. They're just sort of aware, okay, I'm really afraid right now. And other people have a very hard time tolerating it and immediately try to get rid of it. That's why a lot of the coping mechanisms are all about, or they flee into doing drugs and alcohol or just distractions, and it's always this mechanism that's at play. And the other question is, how strong is the prefrontal cortex? Because you can't always override your fear response, right? You can always choose to go ahead despite feeling fear. Now, obviously, if we could always just do that, we would never procrastinate. And this is kind of what this talk is all about, that oftentimes our ancient brain wins out because those forces are very, very, very strong, very deep inside of us. And so, yeah, not always does a rational brain actually win out. Yeah, so again, it's just very powerful forces here. That's why, and we all have this ancient part of our brain. That's why procrastination is kind of a universal problem, not equally to everyone. We're going to talk about that as well. And it makes it more difficult, but by default, we're not actually aware of this. So that's why sometimes it's also hard to stop it, because it's not like we're presented with a choice in that moment where we realize, okay, do I want to listen to this part of my brain or this part of my brain? It just happens so quickly, and choices are just kind of being made for you. And I know this can kind of feel a bit crappy to feel like we're not really that much in control, but we can change this. So in summary, procrastination is due to very natural and ancient brain programs that are here to help us survive. And these brain programs are in conflict with our modern life, meaning, it's not created for this time, and a lot of things just trigger the stress and fear response that really isn't a danger to our lives, like writing a blog post. And it's really at conflict with our higher goal thinking, because it can't think long-term, and most of us, the way we structure our lives, we think long-term. We have long-term goals that we're pursuing. So this is kind of the dilemma of being a human. So yeah, a lot of stuff just gets interpreted as dangers and risks, and so the ancient brain tries to avoid it by default. So I hope this makes sense. It's really important to understand this basic mechanism, because for a lot of people, just understanding this helps them a lot to fix a problem. So, and they will influence, every time you use a strategy, it's really important to keep this in mind, that this is what's going on. So then the question becomes, if this is what procrastination is, and it's such a normal, natural thing, can it be fixed? And the answer is, well, it depends on what you mean with fixed. If you never ever want to have the urge to procrastinate, right? Just be like a robot where you can just figure out what's the best course of action every day and just go ahead and do it, you would have to probably remove a big part of your brain, and that is not possible. But it can be fixed to an extent where it does not create negative consequences in your life, so that it doesn't keep you from reaching goals or losing your job, and you can reduce the problems, the emotions, and the stress you feel with it to almost zero. It's going to take a while. It's faster for some people than others, but it can definitely fixed, especially for specific things you're always procrastinating on. So yeah, how does it become fixed? Because ultimately, it is an emotion regulation problem, and you can research it, and there's a lot of research being done on procrastination, and they really are distilling it to, it is an emotional regulation problem. So you can, on one hand, minimize the negative emotions you get in the first place about tasks, so that you're less likely to have this instinct to avoid it. There's a lot of strategies we're going to go over to help with that part. And the other part of emotional regulation is learning to tolerate negative emotions, and so acting despite of them. So even if you have to make a phone call and you're terrified of it, you can learn to just deal with that fear and go ahead despite feeling the fear and not let that fear stop you from doing things. And we're going to talk about over time how that actually minimizes the fear in the first place. And this is all possible because of brain plasticity. Our brain is very, flexible. It can change. It changes all the time, which is part of why we can survive so well as humans, because we can adapt to our environment. And so even if, you've procrastinated for 20 years, you can still change that relatively easy. It's not going to take 20 years to come up with a different pattern, because it always looks at the most recent experiences, and that kind of has precedence over previous experience, because it feels like, well, the environment might have changed, so this is more important information, it's more recent information. And yeah, the brain is plastic until very old age. You can always learn new things, change the way your brain works, especially if you're under 25. It is actually much, much easier, because your prefrontal cortex isn't even fully developed until you're 25, which might also explain why, college students procrastinate so much more than the rest of the population. Part of the reason. So yeah, let's get into the next sort of subtopic. And so now we've understood what procrastination is on a big level, what the underlying mechanism is, and now we have to put our own procrastination under the microscope and try to really understand why we procrastinate and what our procrastination looks like. This is going to help us figure out how we can fix our problem. So procrastination has kind of a lot of different ways that it can show up in your life. And so I'm going to go over a couple of scenarios and you can see if you recognize any of these. First is there's classic scenario where you may be a student and you have a test coming up and you do not study until, the night before. And then you just have this frenzied, stress-filled work session and you can hardly focus. That's due to procrastination. Now, I have to say this is also partially due to poor time management. It's kind of a mix. Like if you truly, truly believed that it would be enough time to just study for one day, but then as you're doing it, you're realizing it, no, this is not enough time. It could just be due to time management, but usually it's a combination of both. Then there's this other scenario. There's maybe something you've always wanted to do, build a business or start a certain hobby, take a certain course or lose weight or learn a language, and you're just never really doing it. That's also a procrastination problem. Then some of us just sort of at the end of the day have this feeling of not really having gotten anything done, even though we were busy all day. It's also usually an underlying procrastination problem. Now, sometimes, maybe we have a to-do list. We can just see that there's some items on there that get pushed off from one day to another, to another, to another. And they just never really get done. That's usually also due to procrastination mechanism. Then there's also the scenario where you actually have the task right in front of you. You know that, you want to do this actually right now, but you just can't get yourself to do it. You just feel this resistance, it's too strong, and you just can't get started. And then there's also procrastination that looks like just not doing anything, just all day wasting time, playing video games, TV, and that's usually when a lot of people hit rock bottom. So yeah, did you recognize any of them? Which ones sort of do feel like this is me mostly? Usually it's a combination, different times of our lives. We also go through different patterns more. If you notice some of the differences between those scenarios were about how much procrastination awareness do you have, right? With that, I mean, how aware are you in the moment that you actually procrastinate, that this is happening when you're avoiding a task? Because if you are, have this task right in front of you and you can't get started, then you're usually pretty aware that you have a huge procrastination issue in that moment. So you have very high procrastination awareness in that moment. And if you just sort of, feel like you didn't get anything done throughout the day, but you were always busy, then your procrastination awareness is kind of lower. Like your brain just kind of did a lot of these things automatically and maybe picked tasks that weren't that important, or just give you a quick fix, quick gratification, easy tasks, short tasks. So then you kind of were not so aware of exactly the procrastination as it's unfolding in your brain. That's also something important to kind of consider. And then the other thing is, what kind of task do you procrastinate? You might have realized, okay, this first scenario happens to me a lot with this kind of task, and this I recognize with this kind of task. So we procrastinate different tasks in different ways. So the patterns really vary. Now, when we want to think about procrastination, understand our own procrastination, it's really more about what you're avoiding and not so much of what you're doing. Like a lot of articles, they're very focused on like, why do I always watch so much TV, or why do I play so much video games? And in some ways that's like secondary, what you're actually doing when you're procrastinating, or whether or not you're cleaning. It's really about why you're avoiding whatever you're avoiding. However, nowadays, this playing video games and browsing the internet is really kind of a big problem, and addiction to those kinds of things is very, very real and can definitely play a big factor, and something that if you know you're doing that a lot, something that you also have to consider from that angle. Like, are you also just kind of addicted to doing these things, these kinds of brain stimulations? The way that you might have like started doing it as a way of procrastination, but when you get hooked on it, it's just kind of automatically what you then crave doing, and the only thing that really gives your brain the right kind of stimulus, and you can really kind of mess up your brain patterns, so where nothing else really feels motivating to do. And this is also an important point to consider, that this idea of inertia, right? Like this ancient brain, it doesn't really want to change what it's doing when what it's doing is working, right? So when you're actually playing a video game, you get a lot of reward patterns. They're literally designed to feel good, because if you think about it, the only reason why we play games is to feel good. There's nothing external usually that we gain from it. So they're literally designed to just make our brains feel really good. And when you're playing a video game, you're using very little energy, like it takes very little effort usually, and you're getting a lot of reward. So this is like dream for the ancient brain, right? It's like it just doesn't know what kind of reward it is. To him, it's just feels good. Must be something important like sex or food or something. So you are in the state of playing a video game where your brain is super happy, and now you have to try to convince it that it's a good idea to do something else. Yeah, that's going to be really, really hard. So often, when you're coming from not doing anything and then doing a hard task is easier than coming from doing something like playing a video game, and switching over to something that's more risky, usually has less reward, more effort, and your ancient brain just thinks, no, why would you do that? Let's keep doing what we're doing. This is working. Just something to be aware of. Another really important thing to understand is negative spirals. And that can usually explain a lot of maybe why you're in this situation that you're in, if you feel like you're kind of really stuck with your procrastination. And let's just go through some of the scenarios of a spiral. So, you're thinking about doing a task and you feel the dread and the fear for whatever reason. We get to that later. Then your instinct is, because you're not overriding it in that moment, your prefrontal cortex loses, you go browse the internet to soothe your negative feelings, right? Get some distraction, get some good feelings. Now you've actually rewarded that behavior of avoiding the task, because you're getting high dopamine, and you kind of told your brain, yeah, this was good that we avoided it, right? So you really reinforced that this task is bad. So it learned that it made the right decision by avoiding this task because you rewarded it. Now you might, your prefrontal kicks in and says, hey, we really should do this task. It's important, and we're going to lose our job or something. But you have now an even bigger dread and fear of this task because you reinforce this. And this is something that, a lot of people notice, that the longer you push something off, the sort of bigger it grows. Like it becomes more and more this dreadful task, just because you pushed it off. And in the beginning, it was just like, meh, I don't feel like it. And then at the end, it's like, oh my God, I can't do this. So now your prefrontal cortex tries to sort of outsmart your emotional brain by thinking about the bad consequences if you don't do this task. If we don't do this task, I'm going to lose my job. This is really horrible. So this thought creates stress. So you're influencing the emotional brain by having specific thoughts. That's what the prefrontal cortex is all about. But obviously it's not ideal. Anything that creates stress isn't really a good thing, but you're just trying to get yourself to do this task, right? So maybe you ended up doing the task, but by inducing stress, or you didn't. But at the end of the day, if this happened a couple of times with tasks, you might feel really bad about not getting more done. You kind of beat yourself up. It's like, oh my God, why could I not get through my to-do list? And so you're negative to yourself, which creates more stress because yeah, it's unpleasant when somebody's upset with you, even if it's yourself, and it creates more stress. So then our self-confidence goes down, right? We feel like, wow, we're just not good. We're not in control of our lives. Our negative feelings get up. We realize that our to-do list now is even longer because we didn't do our task, so we have even more stress. So just stress upon stress upon stress. We feel helpless, that we can't control ourselves. Our hope shrinks, creates more stress. And all of this creates more procrastination because we're going to talk about why stress directly increases procrastination, and negative feelings all increase procrastination, as we have learned, because negative feelings always go through the emotional brain. So yeah, let's talk about stress. Why is this so bad? And this is why this is sort of creating a spiral. Like it started out with just you procrastinating one little task, not doing it right away. And it's turned into this much bigger problem, and multiplied over days, you can really end up in a ditch where it's really hard for you to actually just do anything. You can really even procrastinate yourself into depression. And then it's really hard to do anything. So stress, again, is a response to a threat. And the stress can get triggered through a thought or through lifestyle as well. So if you don't sleep enough, that can make your stress response higher. And we all have different sensitivities to stress. Like some people just get stressed out much more easily than others. And this is partially due to genetics, but also childhood experience. Like there's some research that shows that if you've had a traumatic childhood and a traumatic life experiences, you have one marker of stress is just consistently raised in you now. So you're almost like permanently stressed, right? And this is explained because if you feel like your world is safe, right? Like let's say you live in a place thousands of years ago where there's no predators. There was no reason for you to constantly be sort of on high alert. And that's what stress is about. It's like you're really like on high alert, like ready to just fight off whatever comes at you. And this is just energy wasting. If you don't have to be on high alert because there's not a lot of stress. But if you feel like the world isn't safe and there's a danger lurking around each corner, you probably have survived better if you were kind of on constant high alert. Of course, the stress kind of killed you earlier anyway, but you're probably still better off than somebody who just sort of like goes through the woods and doesn't even think about the tigers. Obviously, in our modern world, there's usually just a huge downside if you sort of have a high level of stress. And most of us are very highly stressed all the time. And when you're stressed, you're even more sensitive to negative emotions. So when there's a task and you're already stressed, it can stress you out even more than if you just weren't stressed, you're just free from vacation. And we sometimes notice this, like how we just, at the end of the day, when generally we're kind of have less energy, we might feel like we can't tackle a task, but in the morning when we feel fresh and feel relaxed, we feel like we can. And the other way that stress directly impacts procrastination is because it actually shuts down our prefrontal cortex. When we feel like there's danger, we tend to be better off relying on these very deep instincts and, more primal feelings of anger or just being able to run away. We don't need to think, we just need to run. So every blood flow and energy gets diverted to our limbs or whatever we choose to do with the threat. So yeah, our prefrontal cortex is weaker and shut down in a way whenever we feel stressed. So then we have even less chance of actually doing a task because, again, our prefrontal cortex can override the stress response and just tell us, no, this needs to be done, do it. But you're kind of like pepper spraying it when you feel stressed. That's how these spirals happen. So a couple questions to maybe ask yourself. Are you currently at the bottom of a spiral? Are you just really feeling a lot of negative feelings, a lot of stress, just feeling like you can't cope? That's definitely something to realize. And what is your spiral pattern? How does it usually start? How do you perpetuate it? And where, in which part? Because the spiral, that's kind of the thing about positive feedback loops. you can try to stop it at different points, right? You could try to stop the stress response, you could try to stop the negative emotions, or you can just go ahead and actually go work off some task. Like, you can stop the pattern at different places, but you first have to be aware of it happening and then being able to take a positive step in the right direction. And as a general question as well, like, what's the role of stress in your procrastination? Do you generally feel very stressed? What are the sources of your stress? What can you do to reduce the stress? Now, as a note, this concept of spiral, the good thing is that it also works the other way. You can create a positive spiral, and that's why sometimes you can actually get out of a bad place much quicker than you think, because of the spiral also works in the other direction. So now let's talk about procrastination triggers. So what specifically makes us procrastinate this task in the first place, right? If we're just seeing it and we just are not going to do it. Let's look at a task that we would never procrastinate. It's a good, interesting kind of exercise. So it's a task that's super easy to do, right? It takes no effort. It's very pleasant to do. It actually feels really, really good to do it. And you know exactly how to do it. There's no question about it. And there's a great outcome and a guaranteed outcome, right? So if you do it, you're going to get the outcome. And there's no risk of negative consequence. You do it and you just get rewarded and nothing bad can happen. A task like this, you would never procrastinate. It's a bit like, a button that you just push and then you get $1 million and you get a huge jolt of joy as well and nothing bad happens. You would just press that button all the time. There'd be no issue with getting the task done. But if you change any one of those things, you could see how you might not want to do this task. So if it's hard to do, if it just takes way too much effort, really takes a lot of effort and you're just really tired, it actually is painful to do, then we're like, yeah, not sure. It depends on how good the outcome is. You don't know how to do it. That can feel kind of, I don't really want to deal with this, figure out, it's a pain. And you're not sure if the outcome is actually great. You might put all this effort in and there's no outcome. And then you're going to think twice about it, even with your prefrontal cortex, if you want to do this or not. And, maybe something bad will happen even. Then you really have to weigh if it's worth doing this task. So each one of those things, those factors can play into why we procrastinate a task initially. And so I wrote a blog post about this, about 100 different reasons of why we procrastinate, and it just kind of outlines all these different ways that a task can be perceived as negative. It might be boring or frustrating, or we're associated with the fear of failure. It's connected to a larger project where we're kind of afraid of failing. Anxiety, it causes anxiety. Some people are just afraid of things like making phone calls. It's just really unpleasant to do, or it's strenuous to do, and you're tired, or you can't actually do it, or you think you can't do it. It's not within your capabilities. There's no benefit to doing it, or you're just told by someone to do it, and you're kind of a rebel, don't like being told what to do. Or time is running out, you feel like you have no time to do, and you just feel really stressed. Or you just don't even know where to start. So there's a bunch of different reasons, right? And it's really important to kind of raise your awareness and be able to kind of be specific about why you're procrastinating something. Because depending on why you want to procrastinate, you can then come up with specific tools to resolve that and shift it in the other way. And raising awareness, is kind of a challenge on its own, because a lot of people, they just kind of procrastinate and they might not even be aware that they're procrastinating. And sometimes we are aware of procrastinating, but we don't really know why. But now you have the tools to figure that out, because you already know what happens generally. So you just have to figure out why a task is aversive. And it might be just aversive because you've had procrastinated before. So you told your brain it's bad, but maybe it's actually not that bad. But when you force yourself to think about this can be really valuable information to figure out. So what helps with awareness? First off, if you have a certain productivity system, it can help you be more aware of when you're procrastinating, right? People who are watching this and are using Marvin, something like Marvin kind of helps because you have a day plan, and then you can always see what doesn't get done, right? And if you don't even write this down, it's all a bit harder to track. And you can also write notes in places where you procrastinate to kind of remind yourself, or you maybe have a question on the note. Are you procrastinating right now? What are you procrastinating, and why are you procrastinating? We just, sit down and think about why it's bad. It can also help to have a list of the distractions that you usually do. Like, what do you do when you are running away from something, right? And when you write it out and then you catch yourself doing it, chances are high that you're procrastinating something, right? And another good trick is to just schedule those distractions. So if you just browse the internet when you are avoiding a task, you have specific times in your schedule where you say, I can browse the internet. And then any other time you're doing it, chances are very high that you're procrastinating something right now. But then you can say, oh, okay, I'm doing this now. What am I procrastinating? And then if you're trying to figure out, so you've captured sort of a task and you know, oh, this is the task I'm procrastinating. This is the one I actually want to do, but I'm not doing right now. You can then sit with it and go through the list of possible reasons and kind of figure out what resonates. Like, what about this task is unpleasant or triggers your emotional avoidance system? Maybe talking to someone helps as well. And in general, just reading books about it and reading experiences from others, you might all of a sudden, recognize yourself really well in someone else's experience. So again, just like any other skill, becoming more aware of your procrastination patterns and why you procrastinate and your feelings, it takes practice. But definitely try to make this some kind of practice that you may be tracking. You can even do a review at the end of the day and just kind of think about it. But definitely try to catch yourself more and more in the very moments where you have a chance to sort of either procrastinate or do the task. Because a lot of the strategies you can use in that very moment, but you have to catch that moment first. So yeah, let's get into these specific tools and strategies. And the goal is that you know what's out there, what you can do, figure out which ones work for your particular situation, and kind of do them enough that it's a bit like a tool that you've mastered. And if you're struggling with procrastination, you can just sort of whip out the right tool to deal with it. That's kind of the idea. So this is the four-part framework I've created, and it kind of divides the different strategies of how all the strategies you want to employ to attack procrastination from different angle. And there are the action strategies, and those are just things you are doing, like specific things you're doing. And then there's the mind strategies, which are more about thoughts, so how you're changing your thoughts. There's also short-term strategies and long-term strategies. And short-term strategies are more things that have sort of an immediate benefit, like you can employ them right in the moment and it can help you actually get over this fear and avoidance instinct and go ahead and do it. And the long-term strategies are things that you kind of do to change your overall patterns to make it less and less likely that you even feel the urge to procrastinate on a lot of tasks. So there's mindset shifts, there's short-term thought strategies, then there's this brain training, which is a really important part, where you rewire your brain to strengthen your prefrontal cortex. And then there's specific strategies and tools that kind of just make it easier for you to not procrastinate in the moment and things you can implement in your life. So let's start with the mindset shift, straightening out your thoughts. How do you go about like shifting your mind, your thoughts, right? Usually mindsets are things that are very, very deep inside of us and we're not even aware that they're there. That's something that we've learned in childhood, that we had instilled, just something that, basic ideas that we operate on that influence our behavior that we might not even be aware of. And, of course, the first part is kind of becoming aware of what mindsets we have that might make it harder for us to procrastinate or easier for us to procrastinate. And then just kind of exposing yourself to material in this area. Books and articles and forums and just reading a lot about it and thinking about it, really engaging with your thoughts, also reflecting on how these thoughts pop up in your life and influence your decisions. This can happen through journaling or talking to someone about it, but just you really want to engage with it and think about it. And depending on the mindset that you're struggling with, so we're going to go over the mindsets later, just a few of them. There's specific exercises you can do for each to kind of shift that mindset and, teach your brain different ways of thinking and operating. And if it's really sort of difficult for you to really nail down your mindset or have clarity about it, or it feels very traumatic, therapy might be a good idea too, which is basically cognitive behavioral therapy is all about that and observing your thoughts and changing wrong thought patterns or bad mindsets. And the key is really repeated exposure. Like, I can't stress this enough. You need to internalize these mindset shifts because they're so deeply ingrained in you that if you just, read something that says, yeah, this mindset is bad because you're much more likely to procrastinate, and it's actually not true when you have this thought pattern, you can read this and feel like, yeah, this makes total sense, total sense. You're just processing it through your rational brain. And then the next step might be some kind of aha moment where you really like, whoa, this makes so much sense, this explains everything. But then one step further is like when you truly like feel it and internalize it, and you're actually working on overriding the old patterns. And this is something that needs to happen a lot. That's why it's a long-term strategy. It can't just happen once. You need to work on it, changing your thoughts, always being aware of your thoughts, and being conscious about changing your thoughts and really feeling them. You know, which is quite some work. But so the first mindset shift needs to happen with limiting expectations. And this is something that I call the procrastination paradox, because a lot of procrastinators are actually very accomplished and productive people in a lot of ways. But they just sort of feel they have this huge procrastination problem. But to the outside world, you know, they seem like they have all their stuff together. And this is very common because if you think about it, procrastination is only bothering you because you have higher expectations than what you're currently doing. It's always relative to your expectations. If you have very low expectations of yourself and you're perfectly happy, if you know, you don't care if your apartment's messy, you don't care about, you know, doing something as a hobby, you're fine with just the life you have, you're not going to feel like you're a procrastinator. And in some ways you aren't, because your prefrontal cortex sets the rules and it's happy with what it's doing. So often the problem is just that we have very, very high expectations of ourselves. So we're constantly falling short. Like if you have, you know, an expectation you can work 8 hours a day, and you might be able to work 4 hours, but then after that, you're just going to start struggling with getting the tasks done, which in some ways is natural because we have also a limit of how much we can get done. You might interpret it as, and in some ways it's true, you won't, at this point, your prefrontal cortex is too weak to actually override, you know, the physical feeling of tiredness and I can't think. Then you just feel like you have a procrastination problem. And then because you have that high expectation, you're unhappy with yourself, you beat yourself up, very common with people who have high expectations and are ambitious. You get depressed about your life, you get upset with yourself, and then you actually start to make your procrastination worse and worse, and you might end up not being able to do much at all during the day. So an important part is limiting your expectations. And again, what I do not mean is that you tone down your dreams and your ambitions, right? Like, it's okay to have big dreams and big goals. But what I mean is that you always have to be realistic about where you're at right now. And if you are at the bottom of a procrastination spiral and you kind of hit rock bottom, the next step for you what to expect of yourself is not to the next day be super productive. You have to do this step by step. And that's why the picture sort of a stair. You have to figure out what is realistic for me to do tomorrow so I'm doing a little bit better, and then truly be happy and satisfied with accomplishing that. And that's really the key. You can maybe tell yourself, okay, you know, I just want to do one task, but then if you do one task and then you're still upset with yourself, it's like, you know what, I really should do 50 tasks a day, then again your expectations die. So that's really, really important. As you do this journey, be realistic about how bad your procrastination is right now and try to make small steps of improvement. You will get to where you want to be, but only if you truly keep expectations low, right? And truly be happy with the small steps you're making forward. Otherwise, you trigger just one spiral and after another, and you're never going to get out. This kind of relates to this next concept, which is gathering a lot of attention in research. And it's called self-compassion. And it's basically all about being kind to yourself, not have negative self-talks. And there's a lot of research that shows that how it relates to procrastination. And that is really, really important. I have to kind of hurry up because we're already running in some ways out of time. But again, you can Google a lot of these things, and there's a lot of books about it and resources. So self-compassion is another thing. If you struggle with being harsh with yourself, having negative self-talk, beating yourself up, definitely something to Google and work on. This is a really, really big one, and it's called Growth Mindset, and I highly recommend this book by Carol Dweck. She's sort of the person who coined this term, and this is also very relevant if you're raising children. You want to instill a growth mindset in them, and this is basically all about realizing that nobody is born just being good at things. Being good at things always meant you put a lot of hard work in it. There's no such thing as somebody just being born like talented. The opposite of the growth mindset is a fixed mindset, where you truly feel like certain abilities are fixed. And this, you can recognize that you have this if, for example, you dislike doing something that feels challenging or hard. And this is something a lot of people face the first time when they go to college, because smart kids might have had a really easy time in high school. They didn't really have to put in a lot of work to get good grades. But in college, they all of a sudden struggle and it doesn't work anymore and they have to put in work, but they're not used to that. So every time they sit down and do work and they first don't understand a concept, to them it's very threatening, and it's threatening their concept of I'm actually not smart, this feels hard. And so they can't deal with it. But kids who have a fixed mindset, they actually really enjoy things that feel challenging, because they know that that's the only way to grow, that they get better. And to them, it's not a threatening idea when something feels initially hard. So this is a very, very important thing to understand. And it's a great book, and yeah, very important as well if you're raising kids. Now, the other mindset, the next mindset shift, is about realizing that everything in life is a choice. Because a lot of us, feel a bit resistant to being told what to do. This is a very natural thing. As humans, we want to feel like we're in control and we're autonomous beings that make choices. And if you have kids, you can probably observe that a lot in the kids. They like doing things on their own and make decisions. And the problem is that a lot of things in our lives can feel like shoulds. We should do this, we must do this. Even things that maybe we decided we should do. So like if I make a to-do list yesterday and then this morning I come to it, maybe the list actually feels like I have to do this, I have to do this. And this is really the key word. You want to shift everything from I have to I want to. Because truly everything in life is a choice. That you say you're paying taxes and a choice. No, it is. You're just choosing to pay taxes instead of having the late fees or the penalties that come with not paying taxes. But you always have choices. And this is really important to realize, and try to remind yourself more and more of every time you catch yourself of I have to do this, I have to do this, saying to yourself, no, you do not. You just have a choice. You choose to do it or not. And then going ahead with what you truly want to do. This can also help with maybe getting you out of a job or a general situation where you realize that actually it's not just something you want to do, and that's maybe why everything feels so hard. Maybe you're just doing it for someone else. So yeah, overall, the more positive feelings you have in life in general, the easier it is to just go ahead and do things, right? Because it's all sort of connected. You just want to calm down your emotional brain and just generally feel good. And one of the biggest things for happiness is like being grateful. So like more focusing on what you have, just feeling content with what you have and not always focusing on what you don't. And just doing things that give you positive emotions, and in general reducing stressful thoughts and worrying. And obviously there's a lot of strategies for that, but this is all going to help with procrastination. And this is a quote I like: don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff. So now that we've covered sort of the mindset part, let's get into the supporting system. And this is all about sort of the productivity system you use in general can have a big effect on whether or not you want to procrastinate a lot or not. And this is, you can kind of think about it this way. If you just think about work, right, it's this big mountain of things and you don't know where to start, it feels overwhelming, it feels hard to do, it feels stressful. You're just going to procrastinate work in general, right, because everything overwhelmed is a very big negative feeling. And a productivity system is about helping you feeling in control, feeling organized. And so again, you're going to reduce this instinct to procrastinate on work in general, because work kind of starts to feel better, because it starts to feel like you can handle it. It makes sense. And it also helps with procrastination awareness, so that you can become more, so if the system is kind of built for that. Like if you have a day plan, for example, you can always see how much you actually got done, and if it was realistic, and if it was realistic but you still didn't do it, it's probably some procrastination that creeps in there. And a good system can also just help you feel more motivated to do it, because often we know how good it feels to check something off, or we see some visual progress, so it can all make it feel more positive. And gamification, of course, can increase motivation, just so it feels better to do it. And it can reduce pain points associated with work. For example, if you kind of hate work because it feels like a lot of times you just have to make decisions, you don't like making decisions about what to do first, a good productivity system can kind of help you with making less decisions. So yeah, if you're not already using Amazing Marvin, that's the productivity tool I initially created for myself to help with my procrastination, and has a lot of these things I'm talking about, these strategies to help already built in, and it's really designed to help you become more aware of procrastination and be able to overcome it. So yeah, highly recommend it if you have a procrastination problem. Now let's get into the training program part. And this is all about rewiring your brain. And yeah, something that's in some ways kind of mind-shattering for some people is that you do not have to feel like doing something in order to do it, right? That's where a lot of people get hung up. They try to fix the procrastination problem and just wait until they have enough motivation. They just feel like they need to feel like, I want to do this task now, and then do it, right? For many tasks, this is never going to happen. And there's actually a lot of benefit in doing something when you don't feel like doing it, because that's the only way you're training your prefrontal cortex, right? It's a bit like being in a gym. Like if you lift weights but it doesn't feel hard, you're not actually improving anything or getting stronger. And this is the idea with the procrastination training program. You are always trying to do something despite not wanting to. That's really the key. And that's how you learn to tolerate negative emotions, and your brain prefrontal cortex gets stronger at overriding it. And of course, it also just breaks the spirals and gives you confidence and starts the positive spiral. So again, it teaches your brain that a task is safe, because every time you do a specific task, instead of avoiding it, and you don't die, and yeah, we don't die when we do most tasks, your brain knows, okay, this is safe. And it increases your confidence that you can do something. Especially, it changes your belief about your procrastination problem, if you can fix it or not, and how big of a procrastinator you are, which is very important. It's a bit like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we already feel like, oh, I am always going to procrastinate, it's very difficult then to fix it. And it strengthens your prefrontal cortex. It creates good brain patterns, and you might even create positive associations with the task. And this is also something you're kind of in control of. If you praise yourself a lot for progressing in your training program, for every step you make forward, you create a lot of positive associations with doing a task. So how do you set up a training program? Now you can either decide on one task. Let's say you always procrastinate writing your blog posts, or you can make it all about this. And then, of course, as you kind of tackle that, you can move on to something else. But I recommend kind of sticking to one thing at a time. Or if you just have a lot of different tasks all day, you can also just have your daily to-do list, and then pick one task that you're really dreading and one task you really don't want to do, and make that part of your training for today, because it is something you have to do daily. That's the condition, and you want to kind of track it. So every day you complete it, you can make a check mark. You can do this on a calendar. And the key component is that the difficulty has to always be just right, like Goldilocks. If it's too difficult, like you said, your training program, I have to write an hour every day. This task is going to maybe feel too overwhelming, too big. You're going to procrastinate it. You're kind of just getting stuck again in the procrastination. So it's too hard. But if it feels too easy, then you're not actually training the part of your brain that needs to override the system and learning to tolerate negative emotions. So it has to be just right. And how do you know if it's just right? Well, it depends on if you can do it or not. If you can do it, you just have to ask yourself, is it too easy? Or did it actually feel quite hard, or somewhat hard? And then it's okay. Then you keep going like that until it becomes quite easy. And if you can't do it, it's too hard, right? Pretty simple. So lower the barrier, even if it means you just have to write for 1 minute. The key is getting started. That's the hard part, overriding this tendency to want to just avoid it. And now we're going to look at specific tools and strategies. And this is important for during the training program. So if you have your training program and then you're faced with a task and it's right in front of you and you struggle with doing it, what can you do? One strategy I really like is task visualization. This is especially good if the task creates anxiety feelings or fear feelings. What you do is you sit down or lie down and you try to really, really relax and breathe and be calm, and then just in your head picture yourself in great detail of what it entails for you to do this task. And this is amazingly effective, because when you visualize doing a task, it almost becomes hard not to do it, because you can already sort of laying out the steps, and you're priming your brain for action. And you also kind of realize while you do this that the task isn't actually bad. Like you can picture yourself just doing, and you realize, oh, it's not going to hurt or anything. So it also helps your other brain to feel kind of safe. And yes, you kind of connecting this task that creates anxiety with a body state that's actually somewhat calm. That's why it's important, if you have a lot of anxiety, just relax first. Very effective strategy. Yeah, try it. If you just sit on a couch, you know you have to do the dishes. If you just close your eyes and picture doing the dishes, it becomes almost like hard and hard to do it sometimes. Quite effective. Then is a strategy that a lot of people like, and that's adding a negative consequence or punishment to not doing a task. And there's whole services set up for this, like Beeminder or Stick, where you can say, if I don't do this, this amount of times, you know, I get charged, my credit card gets charged. Now, this can be effective, but long term, definitely just don't use this alone, because ultimately you're still using your stress response to do this, right? Because now you're just kind of shifting the balance of all the reasons why you want to do it and all the reasons why you don't want to do it, why the task feels bad, because you're adding a big negative consequence to not doing it. But it uses sort of this fear and stress response because you just don't want to do it. Now, again, for the procrastination bootcamp, it can still be very effective because ultimately you just want to get yourself to do the task, to realize it's safe, and to realize you can do it. So it can be very good maybe to start with, just so that it becomes easier to do it. Accountability is a similar concept, and it just adds a negative consequence in terms of people. It always involves other people, because if we have an accountability coach, somebody who knows if we're doing something or not, we just have a natural tendency of not wanting to embarrass ourselves. So that's a negative consequence. But the tip is that instead of focusing on the negatives, right? So then we create more fear, more stress. Oh my God, I have to do this, or this person's gonna be disappointed in me. Those are all negative thoughts in general. We try to avoid those. Instead, you can focus on positive emotions like, oh, I'm really gonna impress that person if I do this, or even proving someone wrong can feel like a satisfying feeling if somebody feels like that you can't actually do this. Or just feeling like, you know, if you have an accountability partner in terms of you're running a business together, that if I do this, I'm really going to make it easier for the other person. And that can be a very motivating feeling to help you, shift the balance more in favor of doing the task. Adding a reward just creates a better sort of, more motivation for us to do it, because we attach another positive thing to it. We can modify the task. So we could, for example, I find putting laundry away really boring. So I always watch my favorite show with it, and I don't watch the show any other time other than when I'm doing laundry. So often I'm kind of motivated to do the laundry. It becomes easier for me to do laundry because, again, laundry doesn't really have anything to do with deep mindsets or anything. It's just something I find boring, especially for boring tasks. This can be a very good strategy. You kind of bundle it with something more fun, or do it with someone else. Or watching TV while you exercise, stuff like that. Here is more of a thought strategy. So again, every time you're about to do a task, or you want to do a task, but you're not, there's always reasons for wanting to do it, right? There's some reason why you want to do it. And then there's also the fear or the reasons why you don't want to do it. And you can kind of control which thoughts you focus on. And so you focus on why you want to do this, what you will gain, how you will feel when it's done, everything that's positive, why you have chosen to do this. And you can even reframe the task in a very positive light. So for example, if it's about cleaning out your room, you can rephrasing it as creating a beautiful atmosphere for myself, a beautiful environment, or creating a calm space for myself, anything that just makes you focus on the positive that this task is giving you. Another strategy is reason with yourself. So this works especially well if we have a lot of negative emotions like fear or failure. The key is to sit with the negative emotion, right? Like, you don't have to go do the task, but at least try to tolerate the feeling and don't go do something else to distract yourself. Sit with it. Ask yourself, why are you afraid of this task? Try to be specific. Figure out why this task is creating fear in you. And talk to yourself as if you're a friend that you're trying to help. This also kind of goes into the self-compassion concept. What would you tell a friend who would not want to do this because they're afraid of the blog post? And tell yourself these things. And come up with reasons why there's no need to worry. And some of the reasons will really, really resonate with you. And then those you have to write down and always come back to when you're about to do this task. So for me, this was really an important strategy when I was working on Marvin and launching Marvin. I had a lot of fear of launching Marvin, just always feeling like it's not good enough. And it was really difficult for me to move forward and actually just launch it. And so I was just sitting with my feeling and figuring out what was creating the negative feelings and the emotions, what I was afraid of. And I just chose to focus more on, I would just realize that nothing bad could happen, that I could always improve it, even if it wasn't perfect, that even if it was just helping one person already, then it would be worth it. There's just a lot of thoughts I sort of told myself, and some of them really resonated and made me feel like, oh yeah, and then just kind of took the fear away. So those I wrote down, because again, like every time I was then working on launching Marvin, this would come up again, and I had to put myself actively into this brain state and remind myself of these reasonings. It's not just something that happens once, because all the brain patterns are still there. And then a key thing is to always just focus on getting started. So if the task you're dreading and you realize it's quite a long task, try to just reason with yourself and say, I'm just going to get started on this. It's not about completing the task. Forget about that. You just want to get started for 5 minutes and make the threshold really, really small for whatever feels doable, and really stick to it. Because again, you just have the biggest resistance at the start, where you feel like this task isn't safe. And the moment you do it, we often realize that it's not as bad. Like, our ancient brain is really good at hyping up a task and making it seem really big and scary. And once we do it, it's like, oh, okay, whatever, this is fine. And so, yeah, the biggest resistance at the start, just get over that hurdle, get started. You'll feel a lot easier, and you won't have reinforced the pattern, and you'll have created a brain training effect, and you have more belief in yourself that you can do it. So just get started. Another kind of strategy is to have sort of a start trigger. So the moment you notice that you get this feeling of don't even let yourself give into that and start thinking about, how much your life sucks, how much it has to, and have some kind of trigger that you just, every time you do it, you have to get started on the task. And it's good if it's a physical trigger, or maybe even something you're saying. So like some people just clap and say, like, let's do it, or I got this. And the rule is, again, you have to do it every time you do this. And with time, you just associate that so much with sort of action and overriding your fear response, that it will become easier and easier, and you can do it. Another thing that people like a lot is a countdown, where they just sort of resist. An important part is always resisting running away, right? So you don't have to get started right away, but you just can't run away. So it's better if you just sit with the feeling of like, I don't want to do this, and then you're just like, okay, I'm going to count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you do it. Something like that can be very, very effective. Another strategy is just breaking it down. Often tasks are just too big, too vague, and so just say, okay, I'm not going to do this, but I'm going to break it down. I'm going to figure out what the smaller steps are. Make that your first step. At least you're engaging with the task, you're not completely running away from it. And then you usually find that the first step is so simple that you might as well do it. Another really good strategy where there's a lot of interesting research is scheduling your time for procrastination. So whatever you usually do when you procrastinate, like browsing the internet or playing a video game, schedule specific times throughout your day where you do that. And this has shown in students to really reduce their procrastination. Another thing is implementation intentions, and that's basically being very, very specific, making very specific intentions for when you want to do something. So when, where, and how. This can work well for like singular tasks that you're going to procrastinate. Like the more specific you are with when you're going to do it, the more likely you're actually going to do it. Because again, it kind of creates a lot of negative consequences for not doing it. We don't really want to disappoint ourselves. And again, there's a lot of studies about this. And an implementation intention can also look like if this, then that. So the moment I get up in bed, I'm going to go do this. Like you just have to be very specific, and you can attach it to whatever you were doing before. This is a strategy I really like, and there's a lot of sort of interesting research about how the relationship we have with our future self, right? That it's almost like not a real person. That's why it's so easy for us to procrastinate things, because we just feel like I don't feel like this, but I'm just going to postpone it, as if that person in the morning can just deal with it. We don't care. And often we also feel like it somehow will be easier for that person, but it's still us. And then task comes again and we're not. And to help with that, to kind of have a better relationship with our future self, we can write a letter to ourselves where we, try to, from the future perspective, talk about what it feels like to have procrastinated this task. And it can really sort of connect and make it have a better relationship to this future self. And the other thing, the way you can use the strategies, for example, if you are in one of these situations where you have procrastinated and there's a deadline tomorrow and you're in this frenzy, when you right after that, you write down exactly what you're feeling in this moment, how horrible you feel and how you wish you had done sooner. And you hope you never do this again to yourself. You can even address it to yourself. Please never do this to me again. I feel so horrible. I feel so stressed. I just wish I had started earlier. Please start earlier next time. And yeah, then when it's time again, you can read this letter and hopefully it will have a positive effect. And the last point, again, there's many more strategies, but I think we've already covered enough, is ultimately your brain is part of your body, and your body is very affected by a lot of other things that you do, like your diet, your sleep, your exercise habits. And, this is important if you want to reduce procrastination as well, to just generally have a healthy body and not just a healthy mind. Because if you feel, very tired because you're just not taking care of yourself, not sleeping enough, or you have nutrient deficiencies, it can affect the way your brain functions. Your prefrontal cortex is usually the first thing to suffer, where you can't focus. And that can affect it. So, or if you're always tired, you're not going to feel like doing most things because you're just really, really tired. Definitely take that into consideration and also try to fix it from that angle if it's a problem. So the key takeaways is procrastination is an emotion regulation problem. So you have to figure out why you are procrastinating, what the patterns are, what the emotions are that are going on inside you, your causes. Raise awareness, try to catch yourself in the moment that you're procrastinating, ideally, and learn to minimize negative emotions from the beginning with different strategies, mindset shifts and all that. And also learn to tolerate negative emotions. Know that you do not have to feel like doing something to do it. There's actually a lot of benefit if you just do something despite not feeling for it. You'll feel a lot better in the long term. A procrastination supporting productivity system can reduce procrastination, so definitely look into that. If you just dread work in general and you're just procrastinating kind of work in general, you probably need a better system that just makes you feel better about work in general. Mindset shifts help minimize negative emotions. Figure out what your mindset problems are that influence your procrastination. Have a training program where you try to sort of train yourself to tolerate the negative emotions and set it up for real. Maybe do it with a friend or join our procrastination bootcamp and track it and do it every day. And then, just use a mix of tools and strategies. Try out different ones. Use the ones that work for you. Discard the rest. Be aware of spirals. Try to prevent them and focus on creating positive spirals. It can happen with just a tiny step at a time, and it can go really quickly. I've had people that turned around their horrible procrastination to being able to do everything they wanted within like a week. Now, again, it does take continuous work, but they were able to create an amazing positive spiral by doing small stuff, and it can go really quickly, and you can turn things around. This took a very long time, but it's time for questions and feedback and requests, so write them out. A couple of people asked me beforehand a couple of questions. So one question that often people want to know is how quickly can you fix procrastination? And again, positive spiral you can do pretty quickly. It just takes a sort of a small step, and but long term, to change the brain as a whole, it really depends on why you procrastinate in the first place. I've had some people, a lot of people actually, who their main issue was just that they didn't have a good productivity system, and as soon as they had a plan and a structure around their work and they felt good about the way they're doing the work, they didn't have a procrastination because this problem of feeling fear or anxiety around specific tasks was never an issue for them, for these tasks that they had to do. And for other people, they have the productivity system, but then they realize that they still struggle. And then it's usually some kind of deeper stuff with mindset or fears, or general stress and overwhelm, putting too much pressure on themselves. And then it can take a bit longer. And again, if you're under 25, your prefrontal cortex is extremely flexible, mendable still. But even if you're older, it's never too late to change your brain. So yeah, fixing you can see results really fast, and that's, I mean, the procrastination bootcamp is 3 months, and after this 3 months, you should see quite a lot of change. Are there any questions right now?
So the RC said, I was particularly touched by Christina's comments on expectations, and she knows that hers are not reasonable, but she's also getting a lot done. And then she was wondering if there's a sticker or emoji to put on my day to say, stop, ran out of energy, tried my hardest, and feel good about it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like that idea.
Do you have a good idea for an emoji? I sent her the Marvin in the bathtub. I thought that might work. But do you have any ideas?
I don't know. I think whatever resonates with you and gives you that feeling. Maybe I would put like a heart, because I think this idea of being kind to ourselves and giving ourselves a break has a lot to do with self-compassion and just loving ourselves. And so I think of it like kind of like a heart, just giving yourself some love, allowing yourself to take a break, saying you've done enough, being grateful for what you did get done and how you helped your future self and other people with your work. So yeah, maybe just putting a heart into the day note or something like that would work. So one question I got is from someone who wrote in was, if there's some people why do some people procrastinate more? Now this can have a lot of reasons. So some people just have a kind of underdeveloped prefrontal cortex, which is what ADHD is basically all about. And the prefrontal cortex is sort of a higher level thinking, and so it can have a bunch of different influences, which is basically less able to control emotions. And that's why a lot of kids grow out of it, because maybe they were just a bit behind in their prefrontal cortex development in some places, but then they grow out of it. But if you still have it in adulthood, that's basically what ADHD means. But you can change that. And of course, some people just have a work situation where they are less likely to procrastinate, maybe because they have more accountability, or they just are doing something that for them just feels very easy to do. So then they're never in a situation where they're faced with their fears or something like that, and then it seems like they're procrastinating less. Again, what I mentioned already before, some people have a higher stress response, so they're more easily stressed. There's like people with HSP, high sensitive people, who just take in a lot more stimuli from the environment, so they're more easily also to feel overwhelmed, or if you've had a traumatic childhood. Then depression is a very interesting thing of how it relates to procrastination. Basically, when you're depressed, you're just not able to do anything, like your motivation system is shut down, and depression has a lot to do with underlying health problems like inflammation. This is sort of newer research that's coming out. So yeah, if you maybe have a bad physical health, that can also impair your ability to feel motivated and your ability to motivate yourself to actually do things, because you're kind of in energy preservation mode. So there's also survival reason for depression, most likely, where in certain states it was better to just not do anything. Then there's personality differences. So for example, if you're very open to new experiences, then you're probably less likely of doing things you've never done before. Other people tend to not want to do things they've never done before, so they avoid it. Or impulsiveness, like or maybe how much stimulation you need, or how interesting a task needs to feel for you. Some people have no problem doing like sort of boring tasks. They feel they're very satisfying, and other people just need a lot of excitement and stimulation. Yeah, childhood experiences, this kind of goes into the mindset, depending on what mindset you were taught. If you have a growth mindset or fixed mindset, that can affect it. And then just generally what happened to you in your life and patterns you've set of, maybe you started procrastinating something, had a bunch of bad experiences with it, and then you procrastinate more. So it's a mix of genetics and environment. And one last question, is procrastination ever a good thing? Because there's some articles that talk about productive procrastination and the benefits of procrastination, but this is basically all BS. There is no benefit to procrastination. Some people say, well, I need the pressure, I perform better under pressure. Nope, you have worse outcomes, worse performance. You can't think as clear when you're stressed. Procrastination has a big correlation to depression. You feel more stressed, you have negative effects on self-esteem. In the short term, you might feel like a bit better than somebody who's just doing their work. But in the long term, it has very negative consequences on your life, your self-esteem, on relationships, just a lot of well-being. There's a whole book about procrastination and well-being. And the way that we define procrastination now, of course, some people might have a different idea of what to them is procrastination, but by definition, it's an emotional regulation problem and there's no benefit to it. If you can be in control of what you rationally want to do, it's always a better thing. So yeah, I think that's it. This was quite a long webinar. And I'm going to end the stream, and we'll probably do another webinar about productivity systems and how to set up your productivity system to help with procrastination. That's probably a good topic. And yeah, if you want me to go deeper on any of the topics discussed, let me know. I can always write a blog post or make a video about it. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions in the comments. Bye.